Yesterday morning, at a busy intersection in Minneapolis, something happened that should serve as a wake up call for every American who believes in the rule of law. This isn't just another headline in the daily crime blotter. The events that unfolded at 34th Street and Portland Avenue represent a symptom of a deep systemic illness that has infected our governing institutions. An immigration and customs enforcement officer opened fire and killed a 37-year-old woman named Renee Nicole Good. But the true tragedy began in the hours following those gunshots, as we watched the very concept of objective truth crumble before our eyes. On one side, we saw a federal machine that instantly, before a single forensic test could be completed, branded the deceased woman a domestic terrorist. On the other side, we have local police officers and video evidence painting a completely different, terrifying picture. When a government begins to justify the killing of civilians with political slogans before the facts are even established, we are entering dangerous territory. Let's look at the facts, stripped of the emotional rhetoric. At 9:30 a.m., federal agents were conducting an operation. According to the Department of Homeland Security, they encountered what they termed violent rioters. They claim that Renee Nicole Good used her vehicle as a weapon, attempting to run over officers. In their narrative, this was an act of aggression that demanded a lethal response. However, there is another reality, a reality witnessed by bystanders and by the Minneapolis police officers who arrived on the scene. Police Chief Brian O'Hara stated plainly, the woman was not attacking, she was trying to leave. Video footage confirms that the vehicle was slowly backing up, moving away from the agents, not toward them, when the shots rang out. A bullet struck Renee in the head. This isn't just a discrepancy in details, it is a chasm. Shooting into a moving vehicle at an unarmed driver is a violation of basic safety protocols adopted by every professional police department in America. It is what cadets are taught never to do unless there is an immediate, inescapable threat to life. Yet federal agents operating without coordination with local police apparently decided that they operate under a different set of laws. The reaction to this killing has revealed two starkly different types of leadership. Local officials, Mayor Jacob Frey and Chief O'Hara, stood up for the truth and for their community. Mayor Frey called the federal account a fabrication and demanded that ICE leave the city. Governor Tim Walz placed the National Guard on standby, understanding that the public's anger is justified. This is the reaction of leaders who feel a weight of responsibility toward their citizens. Now contrast that with Washington. President Trump did not wait for an investigation. He had no need for facts. Through social media, he immediately delivered a verdict. The agent acted in self-defense, and the deceased woman was a vicious criminal and part of a radical left movement. Understand how dangerous this is. The President of the United States is using the death of an unarmed American woman as fuel for a culture war. He is turning a tragedy into a political rally, preemptively exonerating the use of lethal force as long as it is directed against those he considers political enemies. This sends a chilling signal to every federal agent with a badge and a gun. You can shoot, and we will cover for you, provided you label the victim a radical. When I was in office, we understood a fundamental truth. You cannot maintain order in a city if the city views you as an occupying force. Effective law enforcement is built on cooperation. The FBI, ICE, the DEA, they all must work in tandem with local police. There must be intelligence sharing and there must be mutual respect. In Minneapolis, we saw what happens when that bond is severed. Federal agents entered the city like cowboys, ignored local protocols, used lethal force in a questionable situation, and immediately walled themselves off with a narrative that contradicted the evidence. Chief O'Hara is correct when he speaks to the unprofessionalism of such tactics. You do not make America safer by staging shootouts on busy intersections without alerting local authorities. You create chaos. The Trump administration is trying to frame this as a battle for law and order. But what kind of order is it when agents can kill a woman backing out of a parking spot and instantly declare her a terrorist? That is not order. That is impunity. And the rhetoric labeling protesters as terrorists and victims as criminals only pours gasoline on the fire. The consequences of the shots fired on 34th Street will ripple far beyond Minnesota. We are standing on the precipice of a serious constitutional crisis. First, the trust between states and the federal government is being obliterated. Governors in Democratic states will now view federal deployments not as partners, but as threats to the safety of their residents. We will see more jurisdictional conflicts, more lawsuits, and more standoffs. Second, we are setting a monstrous precedent for the use of force. If we accept the administration's version of events, then any act of panic or non-compliance can be equated with terrorism, justifying execution on the spot. This is a fundamental shift in what it means to live in a free society. Democracy cannot exist where the state holds a license to kill without accountability. Third, this is a blow to the very idea of fair immigration enforcement. You cannot ask communities to cooperate if they see agents as a threat to the lives of their mothers and daughters. By demonizing entire cities and labeling mayors as enemies, the administration is destroying the very security architecture it swears to protect. Renee Nicole Good was a human being. She was a daughter. According to her mother, she was an amazing person. She had rights, and the most important of those was the right to life and the right to due process, not to an execution in the street. American institutions are currently undergoing a stress test. The FBI is investigating. The courts will hear this case. But we, as citizens, cannot remain silent. We must demand answers. We must demand that the standards for the use of deadly force be the same for everyone, whether a patrol officer or a federal agent. Because if we allow fear and political expediency to replace the law, we will lose something far more valuable than border security. We will lose the soul of our country. Americans have always known how to correct the course of their government when it strays, but to do so, we must have the courage to look the truth in the eye, no matter how bitter it may be. But to truly understand how we ended up at this point, we need to rewind the tape. The shooting on Portland Avenue didn't happen in a vacuum. It is the culmination of a process we've been watching for years, the transformation of immigration services from an administrative tool into a paramilitary structure operating outside and above the law. Remember Portland in 2020? Remember how people in camouflage with no insignia were dragging protesters into unmarked vans? Back then, we were told it was necessary to protect federal buildings. Today in Minneapolis, we are told that shooting at a car is necessary to protect officers. The boundaries of the permissible are constantly shifting. What seemed like an unthinkable violation of civil liberties yesterday is becoming a bureaucratic norm today. We are witnessing a dangerous mutation of federal power. Traditionally in America, maintaining law and order is a state and city matter. The feds only intervene in major crime investigations. But now we are seeing the creation of a de facto national police force that answers only to the president, is ideologically charged, and is armed better than the Marine Corps. And the scariest part is that this force believes it is not accountable to the communities in which it operates. Let's talk about what awaits us in the courts, because that is exactly where the fate of American federalism will be decided. Minnesota is currently facing an unprecedented challenge. If the Hennepin County Attorney decides to charge the federal agent with murder, we will witness the legal battle of the century. The Trump administration will immediately deploy the full power of the Department of Justice to move the case to federal court. They will cite the Supremacy Clause. They will claim the agent was performing official duties and possesses immunity. But think about what this means for you and me. If a federal court decides that an ICE agent has the right to shoot a Minnesota resident on a Minneapolis street, violating local laws without facing accountability in a state court, we are effectively admitting that we live in two different legal realities. In one reality, there are laws for ordinary citizens. In the other, total impunity for people with a federal badge. This destroys the very essence of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. Governor Walz understands this. That is precisely why he is reacting so harshly. It's not just about justice for Renee Nicole Good. It's about whether a state has the right to protect its citizens from Washington's overreach. There's another aspect that deeply concerns me. It is the language used to justify violence. Pay attention to the president's words: radical left, terrorists, enemies. These are not accidental slips of the tongue. This is a calculated strategy of dehumanization. In human history, there is a terrifying pattern. Before applying violence to a group of people, power must first dehumanize them. First, you call them criminals, then animals, then terrorists. And once the terrorist label is applied, all restrictions are lifted. Against a terrorist, you don't need warrants, you don't need courts, you don't need rules of engagement. A terrorist can simply be destroyed. The fact that the administration called an unarmed woman who was frightened by men with guns a domestic terrorist is a moral catastrophe. It is a signal to society. Anyone who disagrees with us, anyone who stands in our way, even accidentally, loses their human rights. We have seen this in authoritarian regimes around the world. I never thought I would see it in press releases from the American government. We also cannot ignore the place where this happened. Minneapolis, a city still bearing the scars from the murder of George Floyd, a city that went through fire, through pain, through the agonizing process of police reform. The residents of Minneapolis spent years trying to restore at least some trust between the community and law enforcement. And then federal agents enter this city like a bull in a china shop and with a single shot destroy that progress. It doesn't look like a mistake, it looks like a provocation, as if someone in Washington wanted to see the streets of Minneapolis burning again to use those images in their political ads. This is cynicism of the highest order, sacrificing the peace of an entire city to create an image of chaos that can then be heroically suppressed. Think about what this means for our economy and society. Immigration control is necessary. No one disputes that. But when it turns into terror, everyone suffers. Businesses in such cities begin to suffocate. People are afraid to go to work. Witnesses of crimes are afraid to call the police, thinking that a deportation squad will arrive instead of help. When you turn police officers into a threat in the eyes of the population, you don't catch criminals. You create a security vacuum that is filled by real gangs. Chief O'Hara knows this. Any professional cop knows this. Trump either doesn't know or he doesn't care. So where is the way out? Simply being outraged on the internet is not enough. We are at a point in history where silence is equivalent to complicity. We need concrete actions. First, Congress must immediately begin hearings, not for a show, but to pass laws that clearly limit the powers of federal agents when operating within states. Qualified immunity must be revoked for agents who violate use of force protocols. A badge should not be a license to kill. Second, we must support the independent press and local investigators. It is only thanks to citizen video recordings and the honesty of local reporters that we learned the version about an attack on officers was a lie. In a post-truth world, a phone camera becomes the main tool of democracy. Third, we must understand this is not a fight between Democrats and Republicans. A bullet doesn't ask for party affiliation. Government overreach threatens a conservative just as much as a liberal. If today they come for immigrants and activists while violating the law, tomorrow they will come for anyone who seems inconvenient to them. I want to end where I began. America is an idea. The idea that the law is above the king, that government exists with the consent of the governed, that every human life is sacred. What happened on the asphalt of Minneapolis is a betrayal of that idea. The blood of Renee Nicole Good is a stain on the conscience of our nation. But this stain can either become an eternal shame or a turning point when we say, enough. We have a choice. We can allow fear to turn us into a nation where neighbors inform on each other and people in uniform shoot without warning, or we can remember who we are. We can demand the return of an America where justice is not just a word in a textbook, but a reality. The path will be long, the battle will be hard, but looking at how the residents of Minneapolis, despite the fear, are coming out to demand the truth, I believe we have a chance. Do not turn away. Do not allow them to rewrite the history of this morning. Remember her name, and remember that it could have been anyone in her place. Thank you. Renee Nicole Good was a human being. She was a daughter. According to her mother, she was an amazing person. She had rights, and the most important of those was the right to life and the right to due process, not to an execution in the street. American institutions are currently undergoing a stress test. The FBI is investigating. The courts will hear this case. But we, as citizens, cannot remain silent. We must demand answers. We must demand that the standards for the use of deadly force be the same for everyone, whether a patrol officer or a federal agent. Because if we allow fear and political expediency to replace the law, we will lose something far more valuable than border security. We will lose the soul of our country. Americans have always known how to correct the course of their government when it strays, but to do so, we must have the courage to look the truth in the eye, no matter how bitter it may be.